Right, thank you for that. This is the East Bay Regional Park District Board Finance Committee meeting for February, May 28th. And I am Chair Beverly Lane. I'd like to begin by saying that pursuant to Governor Newsom's executive order number N2920 and the health officer's current shelter-in-place orders from Alameda County, that we are having our meeting over Zoom, and we are not having a meeting in person. So if people have joined us and want to do some public comments, the way you can do that is link to Caitlin Stone, who is, if you're seeing this, she just did a little wave. And her email is cstone@ebparks.org. So let me just start by asking her, have we received any requests for public comment, Caitlin?
Not at this time, Chair.
Okay, and so I will rely on you to tell me if someone has contacted us and wants to provide a public comment on an item as we go.
Happy to do that.
Okay, so with me on the committee today are Elizabeth Eccles and Ellen Corbett on the board, and we have several staff members. So I'll introduce Deborah Ocker, and you have some people you want to introduce now?
Thank you, Director Lane. I'm Deborah Ocker, the AGM of Finance and Management Services, and I'll introduce, we have with us Assistant Finance Officer Michelle Strawson O'Hara, Assistant Finance Officer Deborah Spalding, Audit Manager David Sumner, and we also have, also presenting, we have Administrative Analyst Tabang Singh, and I think those are the major presenters. We have other staff in attendance and a few consultants that we will introduce during their items.
All right, thank you very much. So we do have a fairly full agenda, and we're going to work through it in an effort to be efficient. And so I'll begin with the first item, which is the March 31st, 2021 investment report and portfolio review. And I think Deborah Spalding is the lead on this.
Yes, so, good afternoon. I'm Deborah Spalding, and I'm going to be sharing my screen here. Did I get that right? No, stop share. I will be presenting a brief overview of our first quarter investment results, and then I'm going to turn it over to our consultants who are here from PFM, Allison County, and Monique Spike. So now am I sharing?
You are, you just have to start the presentation.
Okay, good, all right.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, just before this starts, I needed to indicate that we are going to make a adjustment on the agenda. So for those of you who have the agenda, it goes from 1 until 8. And what we're going to do is move item 7 to be dealt with after item 4. So if you would please put that on your agenda, I'd appreciate it. All right, thank you. Deb. Go ahead.
And Deborah, if you could do your display settings, go ahead and click display settings and flip that.
All right. How's that?
Perfect.
Better?
Ready to go.
All right, so I'm going to begin by walking you through the table that is on page 3 of your packet. And this is a summary of our investment balances as of the end of the first quarter. And I'm going to start at the top of that page where we look at the short-term investments, the liquidity portfolio. And the main point here is that our short-term yields are decreasing. So we're getting less revenue from those short-term investments. For example, our LAIF, our local agency investment funds, it was yielding 0.5% in December. Now it's down to 0.3%. Our CAMP, our California Asset Management Program funds, the yield was 0.1% in December. Now it's down to 0.05%. in April. And lastly, Bank of the West sweep funds. Now we're getting 0% earnings on that account. And if you look down at the bottom of the page, you see we've broken down the investment earnings. And you can see that the short-term earnings, if you compare how we did in Q1 of last year, we earned over $600,000 in revenue. And this year in Q1 on those short-term investments, under $100,000. So that's a big reduction. If you look at our midterm investments, those earnings are not going down as quickly. And so PFM is going to get into more detail in their presentation, but I just wanted to bring that to your attention in the overview. Now looking further down on the page, we have our short and midterm securities. And the main thing to draw your attention to here is increasing holdings of US Treasuries in the first quarter. So at the end of last quarter, we had 47 million in US Treasuries, and that's now up to 55 million. PFM, again, will get into this a little bit more in their presentation. And in addition, we have now added longer term securities to our portfolio. So we're investing out beyond 5 years, and this is allowable per our investment policy. And then moving further down on that page 3, we look at our project bond funds, which are held in trust. And just looking forward to the future, we are continuing to draw down our Measure WW bond funds. And at this point, we are planning to issue our next series of bonds in late fall. I'll take a recommendation after you hear Allison's presentation. And I will point out one other thing, which is that there were some changes to PFM's presentation. So in your packet, the ESG section is slightly different what you'll be seeing in Allison's and Monique's presentation. Thank you.
All right. Are there any questions for Deborah before we move to the PFM presentation? Okay, hearing none, please proceed.
All right, thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. As Deb said, my name is Allison County, and I'm here with my colleague, Monique Spike, to present the district investment report for the quarter ended March 31st. I'll start off, and then Monique will pick up with the ESG analysis. And just given the time constraints, we will move through the materials in a concise manner, but please feel free to interrupt with any questions. And just to confirm, you can see the presentation on the screen. Okay, great. All right. So the first quarter of the year was a pretty optimistic quarter. In the fight against COVID-19, we saw big improvements as cases dropped dramatically after the year-end surge and vaccinations really ramped up. We saw improving economic data across many fronts, and that was supported by a new $1.9 trillion stimulus package, the American Rescue Plan Act, that was passed in March. With the improving economic data and the stimulus, we did see inflation expectations pick up during the quarter, and this led to an increase in interest rates on longer term securities, treasuries, including other sectors. The increase in longer term yields combined with the non-movement of shorter term yields led to a steepening yield curve as the front end of the curve, so securities with maturities of about 2 years and less, remained near 0% during the quarter. This chart here is just some of that improving economic data, but I will move through it. I think it's pretty self-explanatory if you look at it in your packet. So on the next page here, we do look at some of those interest rates. And I'll start with the chart on the right. As I mentioned, the yield curve steepened over the quarter. And you can see that when you compare the yellow line, which represents yields on December 31st, versus the blue line, which were interest rates on March 31st. And then the chart shows you 3-month maturities out to 10-year maturities. And so you can see, moving from the yellow to the blue line, that yields on maturities beyond 2 years moved up pretty significantly during the quarter. Again, on those inflation expectations, on growth expectations, while interest rates on maturities of 2 years and under remained pretty much unchanged, maybe slightly lower, right near 0%. And the chart on the left-hand side, which is the 2-year US Treasury yield over the past 2 years, And we just show you this one here. It's a good proxy for the portfolio. The portfolio has a 1 to 3 year strategy. So a 2-year gives you a good idea of where market rates are. And you can see that the 2-year hasn't moved much since it moved essentially to 0 in March of 2020 when the Fed cut rates. And it's remained that low ever since then. The chart here talks about returns. And so that rise in interest rates that we saw during the quarter did translate into very low or even slightly negative total returns for the quarter, as seen in the chart on the left-hand side. So the reminder, total return factors in both realized earnings as well as unrealized gains or losses due to interest rate movement. And you can see here across all sectors, for 1 to 3 year strategies, returns were mostly slightly negative, and we'll see this reflected in the portfolio's performance as well. And then finally, on the last page of the market update, looking ahead at interest rates, this chart here, I believe we've shown it to you before, but it's probably been a few meetings, is called the dot plot. It is where members of the Federal Reserve kind of vote, if you will, with a dot on where they think the Fed funds target rate should be at calendar year end. And the Fed funds target rate really gives you a good idea of where shorter term interest rates are going to be. And what this is showing you is that the Fed members think that that rate should remain where it is now, really near 0% throughout 2022, so for the next 2 years. And so what that means is we expect interest rates on the shorter end of the curve, where we primarily invest the district funds, to remain pretty close to 0 throughout the next couple of years. So turning to the portfolio, the bullet points here recap the strategy, and I will talk about these on this next page. So the table here shows the PFM managed funds as of March 31st, and it shows you the market value, the percent of portfolio, the change over the quarter, and then what's allowed by your investment policy. And so you can see here, and as Deb mentioned, the Treasury allocation increased over the quarter. In addition to yields being very low, yield spreads are very narrow, meaning the yield difference between Treasuries and the other sectors are very narrow. So during that environment, we prefer U.S. Treasuries over other sectors. And so that's why you see the biggest increase come in the Treasury sector, while you see a declines in those credit instruments. So looking at negotiable CDs, corporate notes, asset-backed securities. When spreads are narrow, we don't add a lot to those other sectors because it increases the market value risk, because you expect those spreads to widen back out. So during the quarter, we did reduce the allocation of the credit instruments. However, the allocation of the credit instruments did benefit the portfolio during the quarter. And then finally, you can see that your portfolio is in compliance with your investment policy. So turning to the next page is a snapshot of the portfolio on the left-hand side, so showing some portfolio statistics. And you can see the yield at cost of 1.18%, essentially the earnings rate on the portfolio at quarter end. And it is a very good rate relative to current market rates. The yield at market of 0.48% gives you an idea of where market rates were during the quarter. It's also a good yield relative to those very short overnight accounts that Deb talked about. Of course, you need to maintain funds in those liquid accounts, to pay bills and to have liquidity on hand. But the funds you are able to invest longer, it's great because it does help you enhance your yield during times of very low interest rates. And you can see the maturity distribution there. The portfolio is invested out primarily in that 0 to 3 year area with a few longer term holdings, as Deb mentioned. The portfolio is very high credit quality, average rating of AA, and again, very well diversified by sector, as you can see in that colorful chart on the right-hand side. I'm now turning to performance. As I noted, and as we saw in the index returns for the quarter, both the portfolio and the benchmark, which is the 1 to 3 year U.S. Treasury index, had negative returns for the quarter, as the unrealized market value losses due to rising interest rates were more than the realized earnings for the quarter. The portfolio had a very small outperformance of the benchmark due to the diversification, but pretty much even for the quarter. But historically, the portfolio continues to do quite well relative to the benchmark, and since inception, outperforming the benchmark by 26 basis points, which is a good outperformance. And then finally, looking ahead, the U.S. economy is expected to continue to improve, and growth expectations for 2021 are quite strong at around 6 or 7%. We may continue to see longer-term yields move a little bit higher as inflation expectations remain elevated, while we expect short-term rates to remain near 0%. In the portfolio, we expect to see similar value among the sectors as we did last quarter. Yield spreads still remain very narrow, but we do think diversification is a key element of the strategy, helping to achieve the objectives of safety and enhanced return. And so we'll continue to look for opportunities among all the permitted investments. The next section of the report is the ESG review and analysis, and I'll turn it over to Monique here.
Thank you, Allison. I will speak very briefly on the next slide, which summarizes the ESG performance. If you can go one slide forward, Allison, summarizes the ESG performance for the quarter. The district has...
Again, for our audience, would you say what ESG stands for?
Yes, that's where I'm going right now, Director.
Okay.
The district created an objective to integrate environmental, social, and governance factors into the investment decisions to the extent practical and possible. And environmental, social, and governance factors are shorthanded with the sort of moniker ESG. And so what the district seeks to achieve with its ESG strategy is to target issuers in the portfolio with a what we term a medium ESG risk rating, which indicates that the issuers are paying attention to environmental, social, and governance factors in the regular operation of their business. We have been incorporating this strategy for the district a few quarters, and we have started to measure the ESG risk rating of the portfolio, and you can see that here. The portfolio's average ESG risk rating slightly improved. If you look at the exhibit on the right, the top table, the ESG risk rating, you can see that the ESG risk rating went down from 24.1 to 23.6, and that indicates that the issuers in the portfolio are performing better in terms of paying attention to their environmental, social, and governance risks. Breaking that down a little bit more, there are two ways to sort of add up ESG. One is exposure. What exposures do industries have? As shorthand, for example, some industries are just exposed to environmental factors just because of what they do. That exposure rating, as you can see, went down slightly. And then there's the management score, essentially how managers of the companies are managing the environmental, social, and governance risks. And that score, as you can see, went slightly up during the quarter. We pay attention to ESG risk ratings in the management of the district's portfolio. This is something that we will continue to report on a quarterly basis. If you move one slide forward, this is a new exhibit this quarter. And what this intends to show you is essentially where those risk ratings are coming from in a more easy to understand summary. So for example, the green environmental risks are coming from carbon output and energy and waste and pollution, whereas the social, which is the orange categories, we're looking at human capital management, product governance, community impact, and then the blue governance. And we include in the appendix to our section some more details about what each of these things mean. And that will conclude our formal presentation.
All right, thank you very much. I think we started buying ESG and investing in ESG last year. Is that correct? Or did we do that 2 years ago?
So we started talking about it 2 years ago, and then we actually added this to our investment policy last year. And so it's still very new. to the district.
So are we happy with it?
Do you want me to answer that, Deborah, or do you want to talk about it?
I can go ahead, Deborah. I think it is adding a layer of information for us, which is of importance to the district. We do state in our mission statement that environmental ethic is driving our decision making. And so this gives us additional information to evaluate that. And our policy is asking us to monitor and continue to evaluate and collect ratings. But we really are still driven by our main criteria of safety, liquidity, and yield. And so those are the main drivers. We're still continuing to look at credit ratings as our major decision making as we go through the portfolio. And ESG is an additional amount of information that we are, trying to slowly improve the status of our portfolio in those categories. That's our position today. So.
Well, I appreciate the report and the charts helped to make it clearer. I guess my question has to do with what exactly are the expectations of governance as part of these investments? Can somebody?
I can answer that. That's a good question. What we're looking at, and when we look at corporate governance under the ESG frameworks, is we're really focusing on how the company's rules, policies, practices, how the company's board manages and oversees the operations of the company, with a focus on professional ethics, lobbying activity. Some of the indicators that we look at include ownership shareholder rights, money laundering policies, whistleblower programs, what their ethics policies are, the political involvement policy of a company, lobbying, etc. So really just trying to ensure that the companies are behaving in ethical and professional matters. We believe that as part of an ESG framework, the general rule is if a company is behaving ethically, then it should be sort of a general good actor in the community.
And do we look at the composition of the boards?
Yes, we do.
Okay. Which would be increasingly important, I think.
Yes. So board structure is a part of that. The management itself of the board as well.
Thank you for your questions, Director Lane. This is still fairly new for us, so we really appreciate your questions.
Mm-hmm.
And I think at our next quarterly check-in, we can make sure we allocate a good amount of time to go over those details. That'd be great.
Okay, that would be good. Any questions, Elizabeth or Ellen? Any comments on this?
Yeah,
Go ahead. No, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. I just had, well, first of all, thank you very much for the report. It's very helpful and really appreciate the move to diversify out of some of the shorter term securities that are, being pretty battered right now into some of the longer term and still safe securities. I did have a question just when Deb showed her slide, and I'm trying to see it in my head right now, but were you comparing when you showed that very drastic difference between 2020 and 2021? Was that just a comparison of first quarter? This is on the earnings.
Yes. Am I sharing my screen? I'm trying to.
Yeah, if you can pull up the slide where you showed the,
Yeah. Is that it?
So it looks like we're comparing December to this first quarter.
or
So I was talking about the short-term earnings. Is that?
yes, yeah, okay. So this is, I was just, yeah, when you moved away from that slide, I was just trying to understand in my head, like why it was so different, but I see now, so the first quarter, that was really largely pre-COVID. And so So 2021, and we're still, just coming out of COVID. So that explains why those short-term securities are so, why the short-term earnings are so bad in Q1. Yeah, I just wanted to make sure I understood that. So, okay, that was all. Thank you.
You're welcome.
And Ellen, you had?
Yeah, my comment would just be appreciate the tracking also and the concern regarding the short-term elements. So glad we so thoroughly watch everything and we're so careful and we adjust accordingly. And also, I think it's really great that it looks like we're stepping into a role to be one of the leaders in the I'm forgetting the acronym ER. the good green stuff. I think we invest a substantial amount of money in the fact that we care about those that we invest in, that they're ethical and they protect the environment and such things. I think that's a great leadership role for us to lead by example in that. So, and it looks like so far, it's not a bad place to be investing. And I understand we use our cautious behavior in investing within that realm as well. So thank you.
Okay, thank you. So what we are asked here to do is recommend this to the board, correct? And
That's
so
right.
do I hear a motion?
So moved.
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
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 Great.
And do we need to have Caitlin do a roll?
You read
Yeah.
my mind perfectly. Thank you so much.
Okay.
So we're in full accordance with the Brown Act because we are having someone call in. We want to make sure to vote individually. I know this is just a technical procedure. So would Director Corbett, how do you vote?
Aye.
Thank you. And Director Eccles.
Aye.
Thank you. And Chair Lane.
Aye.
Thank you so much.
I forgot. I thought I'm thinking Zoom is live now.
I appreciate it.
Yeah. All right. So let's turn to our second item, which is the Regional Park Retirement Plan update and administer selection.
All right. Am I sharing my screen now? Is this good? Okay.
Yes, I'm seeing it.
All right. So again, Deborah Spalding, Assistant Finance Officer, and this is an update on the East Bay Regional Park District Retirement Plan. We have here today Mark Schulte from Van Iwerden Associates, and he's going to start us off with the actuarial update, and then I'm going to rejoin and talk to you about our administrator selection, the RFP process, and our selection. So Mark, I'm going to turn it over to you. Do you have your presentation that you can pull up? If not, I can take a minute and pull it up for you.
Oh, I have it here. I will share my screen in just a moment. Okay. Are we live? Can everyone see this?
Yes.
Okay,
thank you, Mark.
perfect. For the record, my name is Mark Schulte, actuary at Van Iwerden Associates, and going to do a brief presentation on a couple of the district's pension plans. Namely, I'm going to skip through here, the general employees and the sworn safety plans. And just a quick recap on some pension background on these plans. They are closed pension plans for a couple decades now, each of them, with very few active members remaining, because all new employees go into the CalPERS pension plans. But we still have to prepare an annual financial review of the pension plans, both for GASB accounting purposes, which go on your financial statements. And also we prepare funding calculations to determine the contribution requirements to each of the plans. So you might hear me use the terminology GASB accounting, that's the financial reporting, and then the funding for when we determine the contributions. And really what we do as actuaries is we have data on all your plan members, mostly retirees, and our models project out how long you're going to be paying pension annuities to these members. And so this chart illustrates that right now you're paying about $4 million per year to your retirees in these plans. And over time, we expect that to gradually decline as the plans mature. And we can also see the relative size of the two plans. The general employees plan much larger, about 170 members, versus a sworn safety plan, which only has about 30 members remaining. So, and if this were a younger pension plan with active members still in it, this would be more of a bell-shaped curve. But now we're really to the point where over the next few decades, we're going to see the outflows from these plans declining as they mature. The next slide also shows that because these plans are so mature with a lot of retirees, the district a number of years ago adopted a phased de-risking policy on the investments. And what that means is that as the funded status of the plans improves, that more investment risk is being taken off the table. So for example, here, if the plans are less than 80% funded, there's 50% equity exposure, versus once they're 90% or more funded, the goal is to reduce the equity exposure and increase the fixed income or bond exposure. The rationale being that when you're underfunded, you're trying to have larger investment returns from the equity incomes, but there is more volatility involved, versus once you've achieved a certain funded status, you can sort of take some of that investment risk off the table and move to more of a fixed income investing environment. Any questions on these items yet? Otherwise, I'll move on. So this chart shows how the plan's funding progress has proceeded over the past 10 years. And it's actually the last couple of years, things have gone quite well, mostly from an investment standpoint. Just a couple of years ago, the plans were only at about 70% funded. And the red line represents plan liabilities. The green dotted line, plan assets. But both in 2019 and 2020, the investment returns were significantly higher than we expected. So that as of the beginning of this year, the plans in our calculations were just over 100% funded, which is a great milestone to achieve. Should be very pleased with that.
So Mark, before you leave that slide, just mention it is very exciting to show that we're 100% funded, but that's at a moment in time, correct? And that's based on what the market looked like at that date that you evaluated it. So it doesn't mean that we'll stay 100% funded forever, but that's very good news. So thank you.
Yeah, Deborah, that's a great observation that pension plans across the country are always aiming for 100% funded status, but it's a fleeting target. You know, you're above and below it. You're never at it for an extended period of time, but you know, definitely the trajectory has been in the right direction. And now that you've achieved it, the goal is to how do we keep relatively close to being fully funded. Next slide. This is just essentially the prior chart, but in some numbers and also showing some relative sizes. For the general employees plan, last year there was about a $5 million unfunded liability, $5.5 million. Another $1.2 million for the sworn safety. So a total unfunded liability about $6.7 million. And as I mentioned on the prior page, now that number has changed so that we're at actually a $900,000 surplus at that snapshot at the end of 2020. So really good progress. You can also see here just the relative magnitude, how much larger that general employees plan is compared to the sworn safety. All right, I'll move on ahead. Those are financial reporting numbers, and just want to take a brief moment to talk about funding, because that is also affecting your budgets as far as what you need to allocate towards pension contributions each year. And those calculations are prepared a little differently in order to maintain funding and budgeting stability. We do some smoothing of investment returns and also how those unexpected changes in the assets and liabilities are paid for over time. So we smooth investment returns over about 5 years. And then if there are changes in the liabilities that are unexpected, we amortize those over a 15-year period. And this table summarized the recommended contributions for the past 4 years, right around 2.8 million, 2.85 million or so the past couple of years. We're going to be preparing the budgeted contribution recommendations over the next couple of months. We anticipate those will be substantially lower than the past couple of years, but they definitely won't be zero. because the smoothing mechanisms that we use for funding aren't going to show the plan at 100% yet. We're not recognizing all those investment gains for contribution purposes yet. So it's good news that for budgeting purposes, your contributions will likely be going down. Just don't expect them to go to zero immediately. It works both ways. When there's hard times for the plans, we kind of lower or we increase the contributions slowly. When there's good times, we decrease them slowly, just so that budgets can be more stable. Brief chart. This is just a graphic representation of investment returns. I'm not going to spend much time on this other than to point out that 2019 and 2020 were really good years. Especially, we assume about a 4% return on the plan assets. That was developed an assumption a number of years back from the investment advisor. And really, with a low interest rate environment and good equity returns, those are really bumped up the plan's investment values. So I don't expect we're going to continue to see such large returns from a plan invested this conservatively, but you really were fortunate to have those returns the past couple of years. And then lastly, for funding updates, we review the assumptions we use for calculating the budgeted contributions and the financial reporting every year. And we're going to be taking a look at some of those this year as we work through the upcoming funding report. Also considering how the funding policy should adapt as the funded status improves. I think the major component of that would be the investment de-risking, and that's already in place. So that's really a great achievement. It's not something we see often in many plan sponsors with their pension plans, is that forward thinking of we're going to de-risk the investments as we achieve different funded status thresholds. So really want to commend you on putting that into place a number of years back. It's working well for you. And then one other issue we've discussed with staff is options for streamlining the administration and financial reporting. And one of those options would be to consider the relative size of the sworn safety versus the general employees plan, and whether there's ways to coordinate the financial reporting there. I believe for investment purposes, the funds are already commingled each year for investing. And are there ways to simplify some of the financial reporting requirements in your statements, just because they take up a lot of room? It's a lot of work for two relatively small plans. And it might not be the easiest thing to put into play initially, but it might longer term help save staff quite a bit of time in preparing the financial statements. And with that, I think my portion is done, and I will take any questions if anybody has any.
All right, are there any questions? Oh, Deborah, you want to?
I'll just start by thanking Mark for all of his service to the district. You might just see actuary next to his name, but he really assists us very much in a lot of information that we're not experts on, and we really appreciate all of his help in financial reporting and in helping us to brainstorm about ways that we can improve our processes. So thank you, Mark.
Thank you.
All right, not seeing any questions.
I would just make a quick comment.
Okay.
Thank you for the excellent suggestions and recommendations. And I love that term, de-risking, and appreciate the compliment on that too. And the more we can de-risk, the better. Thank you.
All right, so sorry, go ahead.
So now we have our next section.
Yeah, so now I'm gonna share my screen again and talk about our retirement plan administrator selection. Am I sharing my screen correctly? Okay, so you've heard this history already, but I'll recap it since I have it here on the slide. So this EBRPD retirement plans, this is from before we were in CalPERS, as they were established back in the early 1960s. They were closed in the early 2000s. All new employees were put into CalPERS, and some current employees at that time elected to stay in those plans, the EBRPD retirement plans, and not move to CalPERS. So we have 189 retirees and we have 3 active employees. And so as we were going through our RFP process, one thing that we really wrestled with and thought through was the fact that there are over 70 retirees right now who have benefits that are partly funded through annuity purchases. And something that we've been balancing is that Transamerica, which currently is administering the whole plan, no matter what happens, they have to continue administering those annuity purchases. So those retirees will be getting 2 checks if we move forward with the recommendation that I'm about to present, where we would move to a new administrator. And then lastly, as Mark pointed out, we have over 50 million in assets as of the in the plan as of the end of 2020. Trying to move forward now. There we go. Okay, so as we conducted our RFP, we were looking at easing the administrative burden, particularly for HR staff who were getting a lot of calls from retirees who had questions about their payments or about the plan. And so we wanted to relieve that burden for HR staff. For retirees, we wanted to get a call center that would have quicker response and better and more timely communication. We were hearing that from our retirees that they didn't feel they had that good communication. On the investment side, we wanted to simplify the administrative management of the investments at the same time that we do need to de-risk the portfolio now that our funded status has improved. And then lastly, we wanted to get some better data and improved reporting on the plans. And so we conducted the RFP. We received 5 proposals, 3 from vendors that were offering full administrative services. And that was really what we were interested in, is an administrator that could provide full services for us. So servicing our retirees with a call center and helping with investment management, and then full administration of the plan, issuing checks, etc. So we reviewed the proposals with a team of 5 district staff, 2 from finance, 2 from human resources, and district council. And so we narrowed it down to 2 finalists, one of which was Transamerica, and the other firm was PARS. And when we conducted our interviews, we had already determined that both firms met our needs. And so we were really focusing on customer service levels, reporting capabilities, and then investment management. So as I've mentioned earlier, so we are making the proposal to move the EBRPD Retirement Plan Administration to PARS. PARS is Public Agency Retirement Services. You may recall this name because they currently manage our pension trust. And so you've heard them speak in the past. And so they do public agency retirement plans throughout California, and that's really their focus. So they're very experienced with designing and administering public pension plans, particularly in California. They're based in Los Angeles. And they do have specific experience administering pension plans where you have this combination of annuities coming from another entity and COLAs. So they felt that they would be able to manage this and that it wouldn't be a challenge for them since they've done it in the past. The assigned account manager, we were very impressed with. He's got great experience with managing other local government defined benefit plans, including in the city of Concord and in Embryville. And then lastly, the retiree call center is based on the West Coast, and they have metrics and they're really measuring response time and service levels. So that was how we reached that recommendation. So I'll open it up to questions, and then we do need a recommendation to the full board on this.
All right, thank you very much, Deborah. Any questions for her or comments? Yeah, Elizabeth?
Yeah, I'll just comment that, first of all, thank you so much for the report and for going out to look for a new administrator. I think it's so important, especially the last point on that last slide about having a West Coast based call center that is responsive and really can assist our employees and our retirees in understanding their benefits and managing them. So I really appreciate your work on this.
And as Deb mentioned, it was a collaborative effort. We included legal and HR in our analysis, and we all had the same conclusion.
Okay, I appreciate that. Ellen, did you have any comment or question on it?
I'll be glad to move the measure.
All right, please do.
So moved.
Second.
All right, shall we have a roll call, Caitlin?
Gosh, I had to find that mute button. Yes, absolutely. So just to confirm, we had Director Corbett move and Director Eccles second. Is that correct?
Yes,
Thank you so much. And now we're going to go to our vote. Director Corbett.
Aye.
Great. I'm doing a new technology, so bear with me. Okay. Director Corbett, you said aye. Thank you. And Director Eccles?
Aye.
Thank you as well. And finally, Chair Lane?
aye.
Thank you again.
Okay, so that is unanimous. Thank you for your work on this. And I appreciate talking to you earlier about it. And I'm hopeful that we'll have better responses to our retirees as they have questions with this. All right, our next item is authorization to renew the East Bay Regional Park District Insurance Program.
Great. And we're going to start with Assistant District Counsel Rachel Sater.
Good afternoon, Chair Lane and Directors Eckel and Corbett. I'm Rachel Sater, Assistant District Counsel. I'm acting this week for District Counsel Carol Victor. She asked me to introduce this item on her behalf. I'll make it really quick. We are going to give you a brief presentation going over our insurance programs and premiums for the upcoming policy year. And we'll be asking the board, the committee, to recommend to the full board that our premiums be renewed for the coming year. The highlights are that we're dealing with a hard market, which has led to significant increases in our insurance premiums. And we will be looking at a number of different approaches over the next year in order to see if we can find some savings for the following policy year. With that, I'd like to introduce our wonderful new Risk and Safety Manager, Alma Balmas, who will be providing the presentation. Thank you.
Thanks, Rachel. Good afternoon, directors and everyone. I'm Alma Balmas, and I'm the new Risk and Safety Manager with the Legal and Risk Division. And I'll keep it very brief, but I wanted to ensure that we can review the insurance program really quickly just to see what we're working with this year. Next slide, please. So as you know, a lot of our major insurance programs are covered and secured through PRISM, which you might better know them as CSAC EIA. And so they had some rebranding a couple of years ago and are now known as PRISM. So we have our general liability, property, workers' compensation, aviation, watercraft, cyber liability with PRISM. And then we have some other smaller coverages for crime, which is through Alliant and a bond with Western Surety. Next slide, please. So just some quick highlights. I think what's positive to lift up is we continue to have favorable claims history, and we're able to manage our claims within our self-insured retention limits. I think that goes to show that we're managing our claims very responsibly, and we hardly ever have to tap into excess insurance. I think it's been a few years since we've had to do that. So I think that deserves to be recognized. On the flip side, when we're looking at the year that we have for 21-22 policies, we're in a hard market cycle, as Rachel mentioned. So there are significant increases that you'll see for general liability and property, and it's reflected across the entire insurance program. It's about a 36% average increase in the aggregate. So I'll get into that in detail in a couple more slides. Next slide.
So you're bringing us bad news, aren't you?
A little bit. And, I think, this is a good segue into the property program where we're seeing probably the hardest hit. It's about a 48% increase. So it's halfway up from last year, but I do want to caution everyone that these are our estimates because our fiscal year for the Park District runs aligned with the calendar year, and the way that our policies are covered are traditionally July through June. You know, it's a little bit hard in terms of slicing our data and trying to see how this will impact us. But looking at what we're seeing nationwide, there's been a ton of catastrophic events. I think we can all remember last year we had Hurricane Laura. In August, we've had a bunch of wildfires and firestorms across the whole Western Territory, not just California, but Oregon, Washington. But that's the most relevant for us in terms of where we are in terms of our risk profile and the lands that we have across 2 different counties. And so just to speak to that alone, the wildfires have increased 3 times from the early 2000s compared to this last decade, and 8 of the 10 largest wildfires in California history happened within the last decade. So the aftermath of that has really had a domino effect on our premiums because of our risk profile. And so we're definitely experiencing that on the property side. And so because we're in this cycle, we'll probably see this for another few years. And then we'll see from there. It's yet to be determined. Next slide, please. So on the liability side, we're also seeing an increase. It's about 31% up from last year. And again, these are just estimates because the way we're invoiced is not aligned with our calendar year, which is also our fiscal year. So we're seeing the casualty market increase and harden across the nation. We're seeing this across all of the other public agencies within the risk pool. So it's not isolated to just the Park District. It's unfortunately. More so, we're seeing high jury verdict payouts and settlements involving public entities. So that has also had an adverse effect on our premiums. What the insurance industry is calling this is social inflation. There's just a hyper awareness right now with our juries and worker advocates and employee advocates. And so we're seeing that play out as well. And of course, this past year, we've had a lot of uncertainty related to COVID-19 and how that would impact employers and losses. And so underwriters have had a lot of concerns and have scrutinized data this particular policy year and probably going forward more than they ever have before. So it's been a lot of data analysis and a lot of work with the underwriters with our policy carriers to let this out. Slide, please. And just really quickly, our other coverages, we have cyber liability that has also increased. There's been an uptick in ransomware attacks over the last 12 to 18 months. I think we see this more prevalent for public agencies in terms of the increase because we don't invest as much into the IT infrastructure as a private or tech company would. So we do see that increase for cyber liability. The aviation policy includes the addition of Eagle 8, which is scheduled to be in service towards the end of the summer, I believe, for the police department or early fall. And we still have Eagle 7 in service. Workers' compensation premium has also increased for public agencies. So we also do see that for the Park District. And previously, Hub International was our carrier that provided our crime and bonds, but we have again shifted, as I mentioned before, to Alliant and Western Shirt. So those are just some quick highlights. Next slide, please. So this is just a graph that'll show you where we are in terms of what our actuals for the current policy period are. It's a little over 2 million for all of our coverages combined. And right now we're estimated at the high end at 2.8 million. And so again, these are estimates in a not to exceed amount. Our estimates are provided are in a cost range. And so we want to ensure that we have enough appropriation and authority from the full board once we advance it to the full board, and hopefully with your recommendation to be able to cover and pay these premiums. So the change amount is roughly $750,000, and and that's on the high end for a not to exceed amount. And you can see the top three are really our biggest change in terms of cost increases. So traditionally, the premiums have come in lower. So we're really hoping that that's the case for this year. But with that, next slide, please. I'm happy to take any questions about the insurance program that anyone has. Actually, one more slide. Forgot about this one. So just really quickly, the state of the insurance market. How we would normally think of claims or insurances, we talk about how frequently something happens or how severe something may be. And now, because we're seeing, for example, wildfires happen so often, we're really thinking of the frequency of severity. It's just been too common. So risk management, of course, is going to continue to evaluate our programs and losses and implement loss control measures that will help subside some of that, and also cost containment strategy. One thing I do want to note is our commitment going into the 2022-23 policy period is we are undertaking a full review of the Park District's insurance program and policies. We are exploring other risk sharing pools for excess coverage and self-insured models. I think, we need to do our due diligence, and even though we're in a hard market, I think it would be to our benefit to really explore what other coverages are out there to ensure we're being prudent with our funding and making sound decision-making in terms of the policies that we continue to pay for, although there are increases. So now with that, next slide, please. Any questions?
Thank you very much for this report.
Sure.
And at least you're saying we're having a high estimate now, and it could be lower, which is
right. That's
good.
Correct, Dr. Lee. That's a good.
All right. So are there any questions or comments from the rest of the committee? Yes, Ellen? I think I saw a hand.
I know my hand is hiding in the wetlands.
Yeah.
Just a couple of questions. First of all, thank you for the report, Alma, and welcome. So nice to see you.
Good to see you.
Thank you. With regard to the increased property cost, the 47.7 change, is that primarily because, is that the wildfire piece that's driving that number the most, would you say?
I would say so. I think nationwide, we've seen a huge increase because of the catastrophic events. We used to see maybe a couple wildfires every so often, but last year, I think the Western region was particularly slammed, especially California. And because what has happened in similar other jurisdictions is aligned with our risk profile, we are seeing a lot of that spill over into how our premiums are then going through underwriting and get to that cost.
Okay, thank you for that. And then
Sure.
my other question is really in the way of asking for more information at some point. Obviously the other number that sort of jumps out is the 322% increase with regard to cybersecurity, which of course is extremely important. I would really like to see at some point, I don't know whether it should come back to Finance Committee or to the full board, but a report for the board's understanding on our various preventative measures with regard to securing our cyber safety. Because as we know, that is a increasingly scary possibility, and well, I don't want to say probability, but in any event, I think it would be very instructive for the board to have more information about, our proactive work with regard to cybersecurity at some point. Would that be something we could do?
Yes, Director Corbett. Actually, through David Sumner, our internal audit manager, we are doing some assessments of our technology. And one of the questions that I had for Alma is, as part of a insurance pool, do they have funds set aside for risk assessments that we could tap into? I know in my previous life, they did sometimes set aside money for certain risk assessments that you kind of had to ask about, and then they can fund a additional assessment in different areas for us.
Yes, that's one of the things that we could probably ask PRISM to do in terms of providing funds for a risk assessment. I know in my prior life with Alameda County, we tapped into some loss prevention funds, which I think this would be consistent with that. So there could be resources to help us with that. We are doing our own work looking into the California Joint Powers Insurance Authority, as well as CAPRI, which is the California Association for Park and Recreation Indemnity. So it's a lot of data analysis and takes months and months before we can get a quote and what that would look like in terms of how we can fit into their model and their property towers and what that looks like. But we're definitely committed to looking at different ways, including a risk assessment that maybe PRISM can do for us, as well as these other models.
Great, thank you.
Sure.
Thank you for that.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Anything else? Okay, well, then with that, I will entertain a motion to authorize this renewal of our insurance program.
So moved.
Second.
Roll call.
You are moving fast, Chairlane. I appreciate it. I'm having to move my pen quickly to keep up with you. Okay, let's go down my line, please. Director Corbett.
Aye.
Thank you. And Director Eccles.
Aye.
Thank you again. And finally, Chairlane.
Aye.
Thank you all.
That's unanimous. Thank you and welcome, Alma. We're glad to have you here and fix things for us.
Thank you, Chairlane. Appreciate it.
All right, so our next item is the fourth quarter 2020 general fund and other governmental funds financial reports.
Good afternoon. Let me just share my screen.
Hello, Michelle.
Okay, can everyone see my screen okay? Excellent. All right, good afternoon, Michelle Strawson O'Hara, Assistant Finance Officer. Today, I'm presenting the unaudited fourth quarter 2020 general fund and other governmental funds financial report. I'll start off with an overview of the general fund revenue and expenditures for 2020. The first column shows what we budgeted, and the second column shows the actual revenue and expenditures through December 31st, 2020. You can see that overall actual revenues exceeded budget by 7.1 million or 4.3%, and actual expenditures were under budget by 18.7 million or 10.3%. When we drill down on the details, which are also found on attachment A on page 91 of your packet, the most significant dollar variances in revenues are related to property tax revenues, which exceeded budget by 4.6 million or 3%, and investment earnings, which exceeded budget by 2.8 million due to higher than expected interest earnings and realized and unrealized gains. While the charges for services budget was reduced last year by 7.1 million due to the elimination of the summer programming, actual revenues were still approximately 500,000 under budget for the year. Variances in expenditures relate to unexpended salaries and benefits, which were 9% under budget due to vacancies in several departments such as police and MAST. Also, the pandemic and the related elimination of summer programming meant that we didn't hire our usual seasonal staff, such as the student interpretive aides, lifeguards, and gatekeepers. The district has a practice of budgeting for 100% of authorized positions, regardless of whether they are filled. Supplies and services were also under budget, as the year-to-date actuals reflected do not include the encumbrances for funds that had been restricted or financially obligated at year-end. An example of a year-end encumbrance would be for district fleet vehicles. So new vehicles were ordered toward the end of 2020, and therefore we had a liability for them. However, they weren't delivered and put into service until 2021. The pandemic and elimination of summer programs also impacted bus transportation and other supplies and services related to these programs. If we look at the general fund revenue trends over the past 5 years, you can see that the main source of revenues is property taxes, which represented approximately 92% of actual revenues in 2020. And on the expenditure side, you can see that salaries and benefits are the main component of our expenditures, and they account for approximately 61% of the expenditures in 2020. So next we'll look at the unaudited, unassigned general fund balance. We started the year with 71.3 million. Then when we add the revenues of 172.8 million and subtract the expenditures and year-end closing adjustments of 167.8 million, we expect to have an estimated ending general fund balance of 76.3 million. The district has a policy of reserving 32% of annual revenue to be used for emergency funding and other qualified circumstances. This year, the estimated reserve target is 55.7 million, which leaves a balance of 20.6 million. And this balance will be available to help reduce the Park District's long-term liabilities, such as pension obligations, replenishment of reserves, such as legal and election reserves. And it will also be considered for funding important initiatives, such as fuels and hazardous vegetation management, and funding other one-time priorities, including facility repairs and improvements. Staff will be proposing use of these available one-time funds along with the 2021 mid-year budget adjustments at the June Finance Committee meeting. Attachment B, which is on page 93 of your packet, summarizes all the other funds, special revenue funds, which include our Measure CC, Measure FF, our lighting and landscaping districts and zones of benefits, and our project funds, which can vary significantly against budget depending on the timing of project receipts. We also have our debt service funds and our internal service funds, which pay for the district-wide costs of workers' compensation, general liability insurance, major infrastructure and equipment, as well as employee benefit claims. Lastly, I wanted to give you a brief update on our annual audit process. Staff from Brown Armstrong CPAs have completed their remote final field work, and we are expecting a clean or unmodified audit opinion. While we're still finalizing the 2020 Comprehensive Annual Financial Report, we expect these unaudited fourth quarter results presented today to be consistent with that report. Given the financial report will be brought to you for approval at the June Finance Committee meeting, today's item is informational only. So that concludes my presentation. Does anyone have any questions?
Well, you know, it's interesting to see we have the 20 million there, and then to hear that with our tree mortality, we could stand 40 million to address it. You know, the millions sound impressive, but then when you look at some of our needs.
Absolutely. Deborah?
Yeah, Director Lane, you know, we've done an analysis of the prior 5 years, and 2020 really does have a lot of anomalies due to COVID. Michelle touched on some of them, but it was a very unusual year with our whole summer programming canceled. And, you know, when you look back at other prior years, even going back to 2015, it does really prove that 2020 was a bit unusual, and there were a lot of uncertainties on the revenue side and then certainly on the expenditure side. So we do see that as an anomaly.
Indeed. All right, so any questions from other members of the committee? This is an informational item.
This is an informational item, and you will get much more detail at our next meeting when we go over the annual audited financial report. So you'll be hearing more from us.
All right.
Director Lane.
Oh, all right, Anna?
Yes,
Yeah.
good afternoon. Deputy General Manager, Dr. Ana Alvarez. I just want to thank staff for the good work, and as we continue to understand and get a better picture of what this unusual year looked like once we audit our finances. So thank you for all the work. I also would like to just be crystal clear and acknowledge the fact that we did hire some lifeguards. We didn't hire as many as we could have because we did cancel the 2020 swim season, but we had lifeguards that were coming in to help us in addressing the COVID-19 pandemic. So, kudos to the lifeguard services, because they were very much active and engaged in helping us do facility inspections to ensure that people were adhering to the building protocols for COVID-19. Since we did have people working outdoors, but we also had people working indoors in facilities throughout the entire pandemic. So I just wanted to have the opportunity to clarify that. So thank you very much.
All right. Thank you for those. Thank you for that reminder. Okay. Not seeing anything from the rest of the committee, then we will move to our next item, which is 7, which we have moved up. And that is the accounting closure of completed projects. I did have to get my magnifying glass out.
I'm sorry, Director Lane. We're trying to make our reports larger, get smaller and smaller. But I think I'll have Deborah Spalding go ahead and introduce one of our newer team members, and we'll get this item started.
All right, I'm sharing my screen. All right. All right, I am very happy to introduce you. Some of you met her already, but introduce you to Tao Wong Sepan, who's our new administrative analyst in finance. Well, she's relatively new. She started last March. Her first day in the office was the day before shelter in place. And so she's now been through a full year in finance and has spent maybe, I don't know, fewer than 5 days in the office. But she's done an amazing job. And this is her first time presenting to you on the closure of completed projects. So I'm going to hand it over to Tao now.
Okay, Deb, I'm going to have you start the slideshow for that slide.
Oh, can you not see it?
Still in edit. It's in edit mode.
Mm-hmm.
Go ahead and do some fancy clicking.
Let's see. I'm trying. What can I do that's fancy? All right, let's try presenting again.
Yeah, try your other screen.
Is that better?
Perfect. Thank you.
Oh, good.
Good afternoon. As mentioned, my name is Tao Vong Pan, Admin Analyst in the Finance Unit, and I'll be presenting the 2021 project closures. This is an annual item where we come to the Finance Committee once projects are completed to seek approval to return the remaining funds back to its original fund source and to close out the project. Next slide, please. So to recap a project's life cycle, a new project number is created when a budget crosses multiple years or when a capitalized asset will result. As you are aware, projects can take multiple years to complete and budgets can be augmented as the scope of the project changes. So the rule of thumb is to use the most restricted funds first. For example, if a project has multiple funding sources, such as the general fund, grants, and bonds, we will draw down on the grant and bond funding first. At the end, when the project is completed, our process is to seek the board's approval to return the unused funds back to its original fund source. Next slide, please. So on this slide, here is an example of the improved elevator safety project where the budget was about $449,000 and the total cost of the completed project was about $445,000, leaving a remaining balance of a little bit over $4,000. The original fund source was the Major Infrastructure Renovation and Replacement Fund, also known as the MER Fund, and we are requesting the remaining amount to be returned and reallocated for future projects. Next slide, please. In summary, we are returning unused funds from the following project categories: capital development projects, approximately $206,000, land acquisition, safety and security projects, approximately $179,000, and other than asset projects, approximately $137,000, all to be returned to various funding sources. A more detailed analysis can be found in the summary tables that are in your packet. Next slide, please. So in conclusion, today's requested action is to direct staff to provide this project closure report to the Board of Directors for approval. And with that, we can take any questions.
So I started reading the matrix, and my initial thought was this was $1 million figure, 40 million. And then I realized, oh no, these are smaller figures. And I find it very interesting how close we came with just about all of these. And to see which ones are completed.
Thank you, Director Lane. Yes, we get very excited about this process because it's like housekeeping, and we get to just kind of finalize all of the documentation, make sure all the bills are paid and everything is, the I's are dotted and the T's are crossed, and then we're able to close out. In some years, we do see shortages in our budgets. There's maybe only one or two very small projects that went over budget. But I agree with you. It is impressive how close we are to our budget estimates. So we're happy when we see that results. But these funds will go back to the source, as Tao said. So sometimes you wonder, wait a minute, didn't we spend all that money in Measure A bond, and then the money comes back just because it's little bits that end up going back to those programs.
Yeah. Yeah. So are there any comments from committee members? Yeah, Elizabeth?
No comments. I agree with Deborah. I like seeing everything put back in its box too. So thank you. Thank you for the report. Very helpful.
Yeah, it's gratifying. You can check it off. Right. So Ellen?
And once again, it's just great to see, even though we've had a wild and crazy year, so many projects being completed. It's quite impressive. And thank you. Nice to see you kind of in person, Tao. Thank you.
All right, thank you. So we do need to have a recommendation to the board on this. So may I have them?
Your turn.
Oh, I said that I was moving. I guess I got drowned out somehow, but yes.
Okay. And second?
Second.
Caitlin?
Thank you so much. Okay, I'm ready. Director Corbett.
Aye.
Thank you. And Director Eccles.
Aye.
Thank you again. And last Chair Lane.
Aye.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
All right, that's unanimous, and we will send that to the board, and they can share the celebrations for these things. Okay, so our next item. Oops, did I lost my agenda? Our next item is number 5, first quarter 2021 general fund financial reports.
Good afternoon again, Michelle Strawson O'Hara, Assistant Finance Officer. So we are now moving forward and looking at the first quarter of 2021 general fund and other governmental funds financial reports. So we will start again with an overview of the general fund revenue and expenditures for the first quarter. You can see that actual revenues through March 31st, 2021 were $16.1 million, or 9.3% of budget, which is as expected, Since our significant property tax payments are received in the second and fourth quarter, so in April and December is when we expect those, the actual expenditures of $36.9 million were 20.8% of budget, which is also as expected and consistent with prior year. When we drill down on the general fund, which are found on attachment A of the report, page 97 of your packet, it shows the details of the general fund revenue and expenditures by category and also by division. You'll see notes at the bottom of the page where there are variances against budget of over or under 10%. The most significant variances in revenues are in property taxes, which again is due to the timing of when we receive our payments. Property taxes of $12.8 million to date are comparable to the prior year balance of $12.1 million. Charges for services revenues of $1.7 million year to date are 21% of budget, which is as expected for the first quarter as the summer program begins ramping up in the second quarter of the year. The most significant variances in expenditures relate to unexpended supplies and services, which are on track when we consider the encumbrances and include those in the totals. Attachment B of the report summarizes all the other funds, the special revenue funds, which include our Measure CC, Measure FF, lighting and landscaping, zones of benefits. And then we have our project funds, our debt service funds, and our internal service funds, which again pays for our district-wide costs of workers' compensation, general liability, major infrastructure and equipment, as well as our employee benefit claims. So that concludes my presentation. Does anyone have any questions?
Yes. So Deborah, do you want to?
I'll just add, when we are looking at the current year revenue budget, I just might remind you, you probably remember from adopting the budget, but we did reduce the amount we expected for charges for services, even though we expect to get back to almost normal in our programming. We know, like in the areas of concessionaires, there was still a ramp up of, limiting the capacity for certain things. And also concessionaires had to, reschedule a lot of events. So we did reduce our revenue. Typically it's just over $10 million. And in our budget, you saw it was about $8 million. So there's a little variance in our revenue. But the rest of the budget, we really did put forward, trying to think business as usual, hopeful that this year would be back to normal. So we'll keep evaluating that. In the first quarter, it's really hard to see if there are any things that we need to look at, but we'll certainly keep evaluating that and see where we are. Next quarter, we'll have more information on that.
Okay. Any questions or comments from the committee? Seeing none, this again is a recommendation. So I can have a motion.
So moved.
Seconded.
Moved and seconded. Now we'll have a vote.
All right, excellent. Thank you. Director Corbett.
Aye.
Thank you. Director Eccles.
Aye.
Thank you. And Chair Lane.
Aye.
Thank you all.
All right. We are sending things to the board. They're just going to be ecstatic.
Flying through this.
Yeah.
Yes. And we're doing pretty well.
I will say, in our timing, we're clipping along here. And so next we have what everybody likes to look forward to is the internal audit work plan and the final results for 2020. David.
Good afternoon. Thank you for having me. I will be brief. So in 2020, we had 21 audit projects completed and 567 contracts reviewed. You are already familiar with what I do, so I don't describe those and go on. Generally, there has not been really a significant issue that would be alarming within the district. So you can have the comfort that the deficiencies or weaknesses that were identified in the audit reports were basically just informational, and they have never reached to a crisis point or a significant issue that requires governance, observance of the matter, and having additional things performed or anything like that. So you can have that comfort. And audit project for the audit plan for the year covers also the information system department cybersecurity issues, and we are quite lucky to have that performed. I will describe at a later date more details about that after I have discussed those with Deborah.
Okay, good.
So if you go to page 103 of your handout, then you will have the proposed audit plan, and I'm requesting your acceptance for submittal of this audit plan for 2021 to the board. And if you need something additional added to that, I'm at your service. We can always revise it as you decide.
Thank you, David. That was even more brief than you had to be, but we really do appreciate your summary. And we did try to put some highlights in the front of the report, kind of stating exactly what David just said. But as always, we're definitely reviewing our cash handling sites and continuing to, do training and make sure that park supervisors and new staff are aware of all the policies and procedures. David and his team do a great job of explaining the reasons why we have all of these different policies and procedures and making sure they're aware of them. And we've been working very closely with Tiffany Margalisi, our business services manager. We have Renee here in her stead today from operations staff, and we work very closely with them on all the review of the concessionaires. And that is a big part of what David audits. And you can see the details in the report he provided with all the details of the work that they've done. But the results of that, he spends time meeting with whoever the district business owner of these are, which a lot of them are in operations, and really reviewing his recommendations and figuring out which ones are best to be implemented and how we can go forward with reducing our risk going forward. That's really what the focus of internal audit is.
Well, I think it seems to me a very productive year. I haven't been on finance for a while, but it seems like we got through a lot of work.
Thank you. Thank you.
Are there some questions? Or yeah, Elizabeth.
Yeah, I was struck by that too in your report, just the sheer number of audits and the projects that you looked at. It sounds like a lot. I don't know exactly how big your team is, but that was a lot of work. So thank you.
We are a 2-people audit shop, and both of us are certified. So we have a variety of experience that has been brought throughout the years. And as the district operations activities evolve, we adapt to it and we try to figure out what would be the best way to perform the audits and all that. If you want, I can share my screen with you so you can see highlights of the audits findings for the past. If not, you have already seen them in detail in the handout that was submitted. And if there is any question, I will be available to further elaborate on that.
Well, so why don't you show us that? I think we have another 5 or 8 minutes in terms of our desire to end this meeting in a timely way. So
thank you. So, oh, sorry, I had to get first. Go back. Sorry, just a moment, please.
Do you want me to pull it up, David, and you can have
No,
me?
it's all right. Let me
You got it. Okay.
get my let me get my feet first. Hold on. Oh boy.
We use Teams a lot in our finance staff meetings, so Zoom is a little bit new for us sometimes.
Yeah. So, get my screen.
well, it really was good to have this much information. So
Oh boy.
Yes, and Director Corbett, this is Dr. Alvarez. Just a reminder, we do still have public comment at the end of the agenda, and we do have people from the public here.
Okay, so, here, and then I search.
Thank you.
Oh, it's not coming up. I don't know what we're doing wrong.
Deb, do you want to try to, do you have it handy? Do you mind pulling?
Yeah, I have it here.
That would be great. Thank you.
Sure.
We have backup for each other.
Right, am I sharing it correctly?
Next slide.
How's that?
Okay, so this is the size of the district audit shop, 2 people.
Mhm.
And what activities we do. This is, I think it's not playing. Jeez. No, it's not going to work like that. Deb, please go to the next screen. Okay, so Park Express had really no significant issue. It was just conflicting information that was on the screen and website, and then they fixed the problem. Tilden Golf Course, they had not recorded a portion of their snack bar for about $2,700, and then we identified that. There were some past due amounts that needs to be paid with interest and penalty. They did that. And then gross monthly reports were not supplied to the East Bay Regional Park District timely. And as we did the audit, they provided that. Please, next slide. Tilden cash handling had a few issues, and we suggested basically major thing was that they do not have less than $1 or less than $1 fee included in the amount of fee that were requested from the swimmers. They were established at $250, and it would create a lot of extra work and a lot of additional administrative work. So we did a review of what would be the effect if we change the amount of fee to $3 even, and in essence, that would only cause a $7,000 difference in 2 years, and would really reduce a lot of administrative work. So we suggested that, and I believe operation has agreed with that. Next slide, please. For the Crown Beach, it's run by a concessionaire, and they were not really truly compliant with the requirements. And as we discussed the issues with the operations department, they have taken steps to resolve those. Please, next slide. Deborah. Kennedy Grove, the staff that was in charge of receiving cash at the kiosk was not properly trained because there was no time for training him. He was hired afterwards, and he was not following the procedure and giving the refunds as a combined amount, and we identified that. Other than that, there was 12, next slide, please. Coyote Hill's cash handling procedures, they required a little bit more attention. Basic reason from our point of view was because the park manager was assigned to various acting duties throughout the year and throughout the 2 years that we audited, and because of that, certain things were not properly complied with, and we identified those. And again, operations staff have agreed that they will look into it and beef up the issues that were identified there. Next slide, please. We did a review of purchase cars transactions because they had modified review processes. It's still properly functional, but change in review method, if you will, it creates a few additional unexpected or unpredicted issues for us. And staff again promised that they will look into this and they will modify the process of review if there need be again later on. Next one, please. Next slide. Las Trampas Stable concessionaire has moved out. A new one has come in. The former one was very good with the public and properly applied the customer service and all that, but was deficient in record keeping, and we requested certain changes. and the new concessionaire, God willing, will comply with those. Next slide, please. And Diablo Foothills was assigned a new system using ActiveNet for cash reporting. Park supervisor had decided not to comply with that, and when we noted that, alerted the staff, and the park supervisor started using the new system as it's necessary. That ends my report, and I'm requesting your acceptance of the audit plan for the next year. Thank you very much.
Thank you, David. I think it's really important that you are there and people know there will be some checking on these things.
Thank you.
So we again have a recommendation here. So do I have a motion?
Glad to move it. Thank you for your good work again, David.
Thank you.
Second.
And a second, and our roll call.
Excellent. Let me pull it up. Okay, Director Corbett.
Aye.
Thank you. Director Eccles.
Aye.
Thank you again. And Chair Lane.
Aye.
Thank you all.
All right, thank you very much. So then our next item is public comments. And do we have some people who would like to comment?
You know, we do not have any public comment. We do have Oliver joining us from PrimeGov. So I believe that that's who Dr. Alvarez may be referring to. Oliver, do you want to just say hello? He doesn't actually have any public comment, but maybe he can introduce himself.
Hello, everyone. I am from PrimeGov, and I'm here to assist on the meeting on the back end.
Thank you, Oliver.
All right, thank you, Oliver. It went pretty smoothly, I think.
Awesome.
Okay, so with that, are there any comments from the committee that people would like to make?
Great meeting, Madam Chair.
Yes, I'll just say thank you to everyone for all of your hard work and all of the reports today. It's very impressive.
All right, I would agree with that. Okay.
And we did it very quickly, so I appreciate everyone. Hopefully nobody was too nervous by having to rush, but we did it in plenty of time, so thank you.
Well, I appreciate it. We, all three of us ended up having some timing issues, and we got through a pretty long agenda. And so I appreciate having the materials that we can look at ahead of time, which enables us to do that. So thank you to everybody, and this meeting is adjourned.